The Orc city smoldered, burned down in the wake of battle. The ground soaked in a knuckle's depth of blood and ash. The savage cries of its defenders, now silent and still as its ruin, was overseen by the architect of its very destruction. The Orc Wars were finally over. What's up, everyone? Michael R. Schulteis here, author of the Rostival Saga and Arc of Ascension Mission 1 of Huntress for Hire. Today I'm coming at you with my review of The Black Crown by author John A. Douglas. In fact, I have a signed copy. Now, author John A. Douglas is a personal friend and an awesome guy, and he was kind enough to send me this wonderful signed copy. There's even a really cool bookmark in it. With that said, I'm still going to do my best to give this one a fair rating. So let's jump in. So The Black Crown is a story of Ragoth, or Rags to his friends, a bookish half-orc prince raised in a human royal family. His human mother, the queen, was captured by orcs during the Orc Wars, and, well, fill in the rest. Now, characterization is a tremendous strength of this book. I have to say this up front because it's such a joy to read these characters. Ragoth, in particular, as a protagonist, is oodles of fun. He is a bookworm who is forced on a quest very much against his own will or desire, and he's a sheltered young man who loves books and has not been out in the world. You might say this is sort of a fascinating time with my own childhood, growing up homeschooled in Northern California. I will say that his character arc in this story is just absolutely fantastic, and the twist where you have this half-orc character who is really bookish and really smart and has this perfect memory is just so much freaking fun. Usually, I tend to think of half-orcs as being at the very least kind of martial. I played Pathfinder for a number of years, and I had this brutish lout of a barbarian half-orc who kind of liked fighting and drinking and wenching, and that's kind of how I think of half-orcs most of the time. Now I play D&D 5e, and I have this half-orc cleric who is a bit more nuanced, but still very martial. So I liked very much what author John A. Douglas does with this protagonist, because it upends what you'd think a half-orc would be, and it's tons of fun all by itself. Now, Ragoth does have to deal with a lot of prejudice in this world against half-orcs. Some of this, this generally has to do, to a large degree, with what the orcs did during the Orc Wars. There's full orcs and there's half-orcs. And I have to really, really commend author John A. Douglas for how he handles this, because what you see is that the prejudice against the half-orcs is certainly a tragic thing. It traps them in this position in these societies where they are treated not very well, and about the best that most of them seem to be able to hope for is to be kind of working class at the lower end, and some of them are in the criminal class. And so, yeah, it's just not fair, and it's not kind, they're not treated well. But you also see that this is born out of the depredations of the full orcs, and a lot of these half-orcs, I'm just going to say, are children of war. So there's that aspect. I think, the orcs coming to your city, it sounds to me it's a bit like the Mongols showing up, a lot of devastation, a lot of children of war coming out of that. But then the tragedy is that innocent people, innocent children, are born into this world and made to sort of inherit the crimes of their fathers, and that's not just, but guess what? Life is often not just, often not fair. So I really, really have to commend author John A. Douglas for how he handles this. Yes, it's a tragedy. It also makes perfect sense when you see all sides of it. So there's empathy all the way around without saying that it's okay how they're treated. And I think that is just an exceptionally well done thing. I can't remember ever reading another book that handles something like this with so much nuance and empathy and just being realistic about things. We also eventually learn that the half-orcs are not even treated all that well by full orcs. So that whole angle and the use of the classic D&D races, I think, was especially well done here. Now, some other characters I have to talk about. Cortland Lowhelm is a short-tempered human guard who's kind of think of him as a young man from a small farming village where he was kind of the biggest dude there, goes off on an adventure, and he's kind of in almost a rent-a-cop kind of situation where he's a security guard, and it's not great. the kind of security guard that he is not very, not a highly prestigious or highly well-paying security guard job. It's just, you know, you're a mall cop kind of a deal. And he wants to go on an adventure. He's kind of short-tempered. Okay, he's really, really short-tempered, and I think that by itself led to just a lot of fun with this character. I loved reading about this guy who's a decent guy, but boy, he just has a very short fuse and goes off a lot. He ends up having a lot of hidden depths, and I gotta say that's what you love. When you have a character who has their foibles and their flaws, but also has a lot of depth to them. We have Valmora and Auroch. Now, this is like a Minotaur. I'm going to just note in passing, I'm going to be a technical prat for a moment here. This should be Aurochs. Aurochsen is the plural. Small quibble. Valmora is kind of a heavy-hitting fighter and adventurer whose glory days seem to be behind her. But I loved her character. This is somebody who really gets it, is really smart, very, very worldly kind of person. Also very principled, very professional, has some scruples to her. Just another wonderful addition to this band of misfits that is this adventuring party. And then we have Deneth, or Denny, a kitchen elf. Now this is, oh my god, this is where I really have to take my cap off to author John A. Douglas, because you have a member of an adventuring party whose only skill seems to be making a really clean campsite. And this dude is not any kind of good in combat or whatever, just really good at making a good clean campsite, but also turns out to be a really good friend. And there's much more I could say, but we don't want to get into spoilers. I could keep you here all day just talking about these characters and what an amazing job author John A. Douglas has done with them. But you know, the characters also drive a very compelling plot. This is kind of an adventure quest fantasy, and that happens to be my bread and butter. That's what I love. There's kind of an old school vibe here, which, again, is just fantastic. The thing I really appreciate is I was never ever bored at any point with this story. I was always coming back to it, saying, what's the next thing that happens? There's always something going on. There's also plenty of times where we slow things down and we have some good character moments. But the story keeps along. There's a great mix of there's some action, there's some adventure. We're figuring different things out, like what are we going to do and how we're going to respond to this situation or that situation. The character dynamics keep things lively and interesting. There are some twists and turns. The only real criticism that I have here, there's one plot point that involves a reveal for one of the characters, and I have to keep this very vague to avoid spoilers. I think I wanted a little bit more setup with that one plot point, but this is pretty small beer as far as critiques go. I love this story. It kept me coming back and turning the page, and that's how you know you have a really quality story. Okay, let's talk world building. Now, this has a very strong D&D vibe. Personally, I really liked that. I got that early on that we're kind of going for a Dragonlance sort of vibe here. Think 70s to 80s sort of fantasy, with some kind of modern sensibilities. You know, the characters will use salty language, and there's some violence in this book. There's some adult stuff in this book too, not gratuitous. Most of the major nations in this book are ruled by elves. Now, you might say, I've seen elves 1,000 times. I think John does something really wonderful with his elves, where he gives them reasonably human foibles. So they're immortal, and for some of them, it kind of gets to their heads, and they have a bit of a superiority complex, or okay, maybe a bit more than a bit of a superiority complex. So the ability to depict them as an arrogant ruling class, not all, but some of them, I think, for me, really humanized them, and I really appreciated that. I think that was very well done. The dynamics about the half-orcs, I've already talked about that, so I won't elaborate too much more. I think that showed a lot of thought and a lot of care. He thought about the dynamics that he'd set up with the orcs and the other races, and he put a lot of care into figuring out what it's going to be like to be a half-orc coming out of this situation. So the world building was very charming. Again, a strong nostalgic kind of 80s kind of Dragonlance feel, which I thought was just very well done and very enjoyable. So with all of that said, for me this one is a solid 4.5 out of 5. I think author John A. Douglas has crafted a very wonderful, a very charming debut novel here. It's kind of like, you gotta have to say, this is only his debut. Where is he going to go in, book 2, 3? I can't wait to see author John A. Douglas's artist journey unfold. I think it's just going to be absolutely just a delight. And I, for one, am there for it. I'm looking forward to it. So, who is this book for? Well, let me be frank. Do you like fun? Do you like good, old-school, nostalgic, D&D themed fun? Do you think back fondly to reading Terry Brooks, maybe some David Eddings, Stephen R. Donaldson? Now imagine you have some of that, but the story is on the high end there. I mean, the Shannara books for me were a bit of a mixed, like the first one was not so good, the second one was really great. This is more like the better of the Shannara books, or even better than that still. And just a very engaging story, and the characters really make the story, for me, make the story an absolute gem. So if you like that kind of old school vibe, you kind of miss the Dragonlance novels would be another. I keep mentioning Dragonlance. That's probably the closest thing that I can say, I can sort of analogize to. If you like that kind of vibe, this is going to be perfect for you. You're going to love it. You're going to eat it all the way up. I will say, if you enjoy Brandon Sanderson, that could be another bit more of a modern comparison. Except that author John A. Douglas can actually write humor. Now, Brando Sando is great at a lot of things. I think humor is where I find his humor tends to kind of be not so great, maybe. Author John A. Douglas really got me to laugh at. There's some very wonderful humor in this book that really got me. So I think if you like a judicious use of humor. This is not a comedic novel. This is a novel that has some wonderful humorous moments in it. So if you like that to be an element in this, epic fantasy adventure, then I think you're just going to love this. And obviously, if you enjoy Pathfinder and D&D, I keep referencing, I am a huge D&D nerd. I've been playing Pathfinder and D&D for about 10 years now. So with all that said, who is this book not for? Well, okay, let me be clear. This book is not grimdark. It's also... This book is not grimdark, and it's also not... Don't be thinking, the kind of epic fantasy where you have, like, Malazan, or, Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire, any of that. That's not what he's going for, and that's not... There's no shade on that either way. This is just a different species or subspecies of epic fantasy novel. The comparisons that I've already made are the better ones. Think of this as a modern updating of kind of the fantasy of 70s to 80s, but exceptionally well written, and again with some wonderful humor in there. If that's not what you're looking for, then this book is not going to be for you. With that said, I'm a huge R. Scott Baker fan, and I find that my range is plenty big enough to. I also love Brandon Sanderson, so this was a very delightful reading experience for me. Another thing to add is that this book is not a cozy fantasy read. I'm saying this because it occurred to me that there is a green half-orc on the cover of this book. So if you see this green dude and you think, oh, this is going to be like Legends and Lattes, I don't know that you would, because the aesthetic is quite different. But I'm just trying to be very clear here. This is not cozy fantasy. There is some action, there is some adventure, there is some violence in here. I don't think it gets gratuitous, or I wouldn't even say, it's not even really graphic violence, but there are some violent things that do happen here. There is a little bit of adult content too. I don't think it's... None of this feels gratuitous or excessive, but it's very much... It's a great action and adventure kind of story. It's not cozy, so let's be clear about that. With all of that said, if you like to have fun, if you enjoy quest-centered fantasy adventure, do not miss this book. I will link it down below. Go check it out. If you're still watching, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll hope to see you on the next video.